Let us come back to the fifth murder, the scene. Her clothes are neatly folded on a chair. Her boots are by the fireplace. Her breasts have been cut off, and one breast with the uterus and the kidney have been placed underneath her head on the bed as a pillow. The other breast was put next to her right foot. The skin had been removed from the abdomen and the thighs. The liver was between her feet, the intestines on the shoulder, the spleen put on the other. The heart was missing. It's difficult to cut a human heart out. You're not going to do that with a small knife. You need proper shears, much like you'll use to cut off branches off trees. And so let us start to look at the investigation. At first, the Detective Inspector Reed was in charge, but after the second murder, then D.I. Aberline of Scotland Yard was sent to help. The police interviewed 2,000 people. 300 people were investigated, including the Wild West show. The police had this theory that only a savage could have done these killings, that no civilised man would have done so. And, as it happens, Wild Bill's Wild West tour, a famous tour, was in London at the time. And they thought, maybe one of the Native Americans in the show has gone berserk with a knife. And so they investigated all the Native Americans that were part of the Wild West show. Remember, at this time, the British police force were deeply racist. The police made 80 arrests of different suspects. In an effort to try and catch the killer, 80 male policemen dressed up as women. There aren't any female police officers at this time period. You have to be a man, and you have to be a tall man with a beard to be in the police at this stage. And so some male policemen are ordered by their sergeants to dress up as prostitutes in the hope of entrapping the killer, but they refused to shave off their moustaches and beards because the constables pointed out that police regulations were very clear that police officers had to have facial hair on duty. And so what we have are some strapping 6 foot police officers with beards and moustaches dressed up in dresses, wondering if the Ripper is going to hire them as a prostitute. Strangely, the killer sees through the disguise. They tried to use bloodhounds to track the murderer, but as we said, they didn't turn up. And the police also had this theory that when someone was killed, the last thing they saw was still recorded on their eyeball. And so they took really close-in photographs of the victim's eyeballs, thinking the last person they'd see must be their killer. And so what we do have are some photographs taken right in of the victim's eyes. The surface of the eyes are slightly reflective. So what we actually have are pictures where photos of police cameramen are reflected in dead women's eyes. The theory is madness. Now, they had real problems with any kind of forensic evidence. They can't tell the difference between different blood types. They really struggle to tell the difference between human and animal blood. Now, this is one of the first cases where they tried to take fingerprints, but it's an early experiment in the theory, and they fail completely to take successful fingerprints. They won't successfully take fingerprints from a crime scene for another 12 years. The investigation is hampered by the fact that they received 300 letters and postcards being sent, some as far away as Glasgow, all containing fake information. The police come to not trust the press at all because the press are falsifying evidence, taking evidence and not giving it to the police so they can get a scoop. And so the police start to give fake evidence out to the press, so that when people confess to being the killer, if they use any of the fake information, the police can remove them from their investigations. Very clever. But the newspapers are making it difficult. The Vigilance Committee are making it very difficult as well. Now, on Annie Chapman's body, there had been an envelope with the seal of the Sussex Regiment. And so the police thought, clearly the Sussex Regiment have something to do with the killings. And Inspector Chandler spent quite a long time following up the lead. But then he discovered that you could buy envelopes with the seal of the Sussex Regiment in the local post office. And so anybody could have used it. Now, the police were forbidden to offer a monetary reward by the Home Office, and so they tried to bribe witnesses to come forward with a hot meal, saying that if you give us any information, we'll feed you, which did bring some people forward, but their information was of limited value. They were just after lunch. Now, there were very few criminal mugshots available, as they were still being compiled by Scotland Yard at this time. But the failure to capture the Ripper led to a review of police methods, leading in 1894 to the adoption of what we call the Bertillon system. Please do see the slide attached. That's where you take physical measurements and you break down people's physical measurements into a mathematical formula, which theoretically is unique to the individual and won't change throughout their adult life. It's not used anymore. They also started, however, to photograph suspects, and a lot of these methods are still used today. But who might the killer have been? There are a lot of potential suspects. Now, some of you are going to go, I hear that it was a member of the royal family. That is, I'd like to say, not true. An American historian had published a very successful book claiming that it was a member of the royal family and it was all a giant government conspiracy. That book, I wish I'd written that book, because that book made that historian an absolute fortune. And so that historian is presumably somewhere on a Caribbean beach laughing their head off, because not only did that book sell well, it was even made into a film starring Johnny Depp. However, although that historian is there and I'm stuck in self-isolation, definitely not on a Caribbean beach, so shows who the clever one was, the theory is not true, because the royal that was accused on the time of the double murder was up in Edinburgh and was seen by hundreds of unimpeachable witnesses as he was given an after-dinner speech. There is no way that he could be the Ripper. But there are some other suspects. If we look at a man called James Maybrick, he wrote a diary confessing that it was him. He had a watch saying, "I am Jack." He claims that he saw his wife have an affair, and that after that he went berserk and went on a killing spree. But the diary confessing to being Jack the Ripper has a lot of errors in it. It has almost all the fake information the police released to try and work out which confessions were false. And so James Maybrick is almost certainly a fantasist. Now, Patricia Cornwall thought that it was actually the famous artist Sickert, and he was in the frame at the time. And he also, by the way, he probably sent in a lot of the fake letters, and he was obsessed with violent death, and his pictures do suggest a certain anatomical knowledge, which might suggest that he was certainly interested in this sort of thing. But it's likely that he didn't have the surgical skill to actually carry these out. He's almost certainly just a fantasist, an obsessive with violence and with anatomy and with the cutting up of women, rather than actually being the killer. He doesn't have the skills required. We might also look at a man called George Chapman. Now, George Chapman is unquestionably a murderer. He killed his 4 wives. And he was a surgeon, a Polish surgeon. Initially, when he was born, his name was Kosminski. Now, the murders started around the time that he arrived in the country and suspiciously ceased around the time that he went to America. And that's one of the questions that we have to ask when we're looking at suspects. Normally, serial killers don't just stop. They are addicted to killing. They stop when they die or they're caught. And yet these killings just stopped. Why would that be? Well, George Chapman left England and went to America around that time, which makes him the best suspect. But there's a problem. There is no evidence that he was ever violent. You're about to say, but he murdered his 4 wives. He did indeed, but he was a poisoner, and it's very rare for murderers to change their modus operandi, their way of killing victims. And so it would be really unusual for a man who killed by poison to then go on a knife-wielding spree. Yes, he has the surgical skill. Yes, he kills women. However, he seems to really enjoy marrying these women and watching them die slowly by inches, rather than violently insulting them. And so that does, I mean, I'd probably say that I would think he is the best suspect, but it's a really weak case of him being the Ripper. Now, there's also a man called Montague John Druitt. He killed himself, and just after he killed himself, just after the murders stopped. His own family suspected him. He was described as sexually insane, and was also described as a young doctor, and was suspected by the police. But the phrase sexually insane at the time was just a code for homosexual, and so he probably killed himself because he was in a time when you couldn't confess to being gay, and he was having difficulty actually coming to terms with who he was. There's no real evidence that he was, apart from the suspicions of his own family, and what a lovely family to be born into. Apart from that confession, there's no real evidence to link him to the Ripper killings. And so Montague John Druitt is probably simply a tragic case where homophobic attitudes at the time have driven a perfectly decent young man to take his life, and now his name is further muddied by being mixed up as a Ripper victim. There are other suspects for the case, lots of them. You can make some good money, in fact, by writing books saying that you've had a new suspect for the Ripper case. If any of you are particularly bored at home and you're thinking of what you're going to do after we're allowed out, think about that for a future job. But we have there the Jack the Ripper murder case. Thank you for tuning in, and remember, keep safe. Thank you.